On a crisp autumn morning in October 1986, a motorist along the scenic Colonial Parkway in Virginia discovered a white Honda Civic pushed down an embankment into the thick brush. Inside the vehicle lay the bodies of 21-year-old Kathleen Thomas and 20-year-old Rebecca Dowski, both strangled and subjected to fatal incised wounds. No robbery had occurred, and their personal belongings remained entirely untouched inside the cabin. This perplexing crime marked the start of a horrific pattern that would haunt the Virginia coast for years. Why did the investigation into these tragic double homicides take decades to yield definitive answers? Kathleen Thomas, a former United States Naval Academy midshipman, and Rebecca Dowski, an outstanding student at the College of William and Mary, were remembered by friends as vibrant, deeply ambitious young women with promising futures ahead of them. Their sudden, violent deaths sent shockwaves through the quiet, historic community of Williamsburg. The senseless loss of two promising young lives left their families utterly shattered and demanding immediate, rigorous answers from local law enforcement authorities. At the crime scene, investigators noted meticulous details that suggested a deliberate and cold perpetrator. The killer had doused the vehicle in diesel fuel in a failed attempt to incinerate the physical evidence, yet left valuable personal items untouched. Crime scene analysts focused heavily on the offender's modus operandi, an investigative term referring to the specific habits, procedures, and functional methods an individual uses to commit a crime. Here, the method of attack was calculated, quiet, and executed with chilling precision. State and federal detectives immediately launched a joint inquiry to trace the final hours of the young couple. Detectives interviewed dozens of potential witnesses along the dark stretches of the parkway, seeking to establish a solid alibi for potential suspects. An alibi is defined as verifiable evidence demonstrating that a person was in a completely different location when the crime occurred. Despite weeks of rigorous canvassing, investigators found no immediate leads, and the trail slowly began to grow cold. The geographical location of the crime scene immediately introduced complex jurisdictional friction between local police departments, the Virginia State Police, and the National Park Service. Because the parkway itself was federal land, federal investigators claimed primary authority over the scene, while surrounding areas fell under county or state police control. This organizational fragmentation severely hindered seamless communication, slowing the critical initial flow of intelligence and evidence between agencies. Less than a year later, in September 1987, a second double homicide struck the region across the James River at the Ragged Island Wildlife Management Area. David Knobling, aged 20, and Robin Edwards, aged 14, were found shot to death along the shoreline after Knobling's truck was discovered abandoned on the side of the road. The public feared a serial killer was operating freely across the highways of southeastern Virginia. Forensic technicians carefully examined Knobling's abandoned vehicle, noting striking physical parallels to the 1986 crime scene. The driver's side window was rolled down slightly, the vehicle's ignition key was turned to the accessory position, and valuable personal belongings remained completely untouched inside. These distinct physical markers led investigators to suspect the killer was using a recognizable routine to disable or approach young couples parked in isolated locations. Investigators began building a preliminary suspect profile, analyzing whether the perpetrator possessed insider knowledge of local law enforcement procedures. The pattern of pulled-over vehicles suggested the attacker might have utilized an emergency light or displayed a badge to gain the initial trust of unsuspecting motorists. Detectives weighed the terrifying possibility that the offender was someone wearing a uniform, an insider capable of hiding in plain sight. As months stretched into years without an arrest, the investigation stalled under the weight of mounting paper files and disjointed record-keeping systems. In the late 1980s, law enforcement agencies lacked unified computer databases, preventing real-time cross-referencing of field reports. A critical insight buried in one county's archive might remain entirely invisible to detectives working in an adjacent jurisdiction just 10 miles away. The mystery deepened further in April 1988 when 20-year-old Richard Call and 18-year-old Cassandra Haley vanished after attending a social dance in Virginia Beach. Their car was discovered abandoned along the Colonial Parkway with its driver door unlocked and clothing neatly stored in the trunk. Neither Call nor Haley was ever seen again, leaving investigators with an agonizing absence of physical remains to analyze. The ongoing disappearances inflicted unimaginable grief on the victims' families, who were forced to endure years of unanswered questions and painful uncertainty. Relatives organized private search parties along the dense woods and tidal marshes, refusing to let the cases fade from public awareness. Their persistent grief underscored the profound human toll caused by the prolonged lack of resolution as parents aged without ever knowing the fate of their missing children. Detective efforts were severely hampered by the technological limitations of the late 20th century. Forensic science in the 1980s could not yet leverage automated DNA matching systems like the Combined DNA Index System, known as CODIS, which enables modern investigators to cross-reference biological evidence nationwide. Without advanced genetic analysis, physical evidence collected from the cars could not reliably link one scene to another with mathematical certainty. A fourth tragic incident occurred in September 1989, when Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer disappeared while traveling along Interstate 64. Their vehicle was found abandoned at a highway rest stop, and their severely decomposed remains were discovered weeks later by hunters in a wooded area nearby. The discovery confirmed that young travelers along the highway corridor remained under constant lethal threat from an elusive and predatory presence. Senior analysts faced a baffling investigative dilemma when comparing all four double homicides and disappearances across the region. While each incident involved young couples in or near vehicles along coastal transit corridors, variations in cause of death and physical locations created genuine doubt among forensic experts. Detectives debated endlessly whether they were pursuing a single serial offender or dealing with distinct coincidental crimes. Behind the complex forensic reports and legal debates lay the tragic reality of 8 vibrant young individuals whose lives were brutally stolen. Friends remembered them as bright students, devoted siblings, and hard-working young adults with bright futures. The passage of time could never dim the memory of who they were to those who loved them, nor could it erase the deep scar left on the community. The investigation examined systemic failures of law enforcement across jurisdictions that hindered early progress. Because 8 young people were targeted in 4 separate events across multiple municipal, state, and federal boundaries, no single agency held absolute authority over the unified investigation. Information sharing depended largely on informal meetings rather than mandatory centralized intelligence networks, allowing critical leads to slip through the procedural cracks. Forensic degradation also severely compromised the physical evidence gathered across the 4 crime scenes over time. Biological samples exposed to rain, tidal water, and environmental decay yielded limited traditional crime scene clues. Furthermore, early evidence handling procedures in the 1980s sometimes resulted in improper long-term storage, risking cross-contamination long before modern preservation techniques were formally established across police departments. Despite long periods of inaction, victim advocates and surviving family members refused to allow the Colonial Parkway murders to remain forgotten in agency archives. They consistently lobbied federal and state lawmakers, demanded independent investigative reviews, and relentlessly pressured law enforcement agencies to apply newly developed scientific testing to preserved physical artifacts that had sat dormant in remote evidence lockers for decades. In recent years, major breakthroughs in cold case methodology have reinvigorated the search for answers along the Parkway. The introduction of investigative genetic genealogy, a method combining advanced DNA profiling with historical family trees, has allowed cold case investigators to re-examine long-preserved biological materials. These modern forensic tools offer fresh hope that the identity of the elusive perpetrator will finally be unmasked. The systemic challenges exposed by the Colonial Parkway cases ultimately reshaped modern law enforcement protocols across the United States. Multi-jurisdictional task forces and shared forensic databases are now standard procedure in suspected serial crimes, ensuring that modern investigations do not suffer from the tragic communication breakdowns and procedural silos that stalled progress so severely starting in 1986. Lingering questions still haunt the dark stretches of the Virginia countryside where 8 young lives were abruptly ended. Was a single serial killer responsible for all 4 double homicides, or did multiple assailants exploit the vulnerability of lovers' lanes along the coast? Until every piece of physical evidence is fully analyzed with cutting-edge technology, the complete truth remains shrouded in painful shadow. The pursuit of justice for Kathleen Thomas, Rebecca Dowski, David Knobling, Robin Edwards, Richard Call, Cassandra Haley, Anna Maria Phelps, and Daniel Lauer continues to drive dedicated cold case investigators today. Though decades have passed, the commitment to unearthing the cold facts remains unwavering. The victims and their families deserve nothing less than full clarity, accountability, and long overdue peace after decades of lingering silence.